Everybody, thank you very much to my new brothers and sisters. My name is Don. I want to do an interesting part about uh, everyone believes that the Great Pyramid of Egypt, ancient Egypt, was built by Pharaoh Khufu. But I found a very interesting article which I printed out, which I'm going to read, which says, that it may have been attributed to the building of the Great Pyramid, not the other two little ones next to it, to Enoch in the Bible. Can you believe that? I'll read Enoch, that's mentioned in the Bible, chapter 5 of Genesis. And Enoch lived on for 65 years. Then he became father to Methuselah. And after his fathering Methuselah, Enoch went walking with the true God 300 years. Meanwhile, he became father to sons and daughters, and all the days of Enoch amounted to 365 years. And Enoch kept walking with the true God. Then he was no more, for God took him. Can you believe that? Enoch didn't die, God took him. And this article claims, which I will read, it was Enoch. This is a false narrative of the pyramids. Enoch really built the Great Pyramid. As it turns out, the Great Pyramid of Giza, otherwise known as the Pyramid of Cheops or Khufu, may not have been attributed to the person who ordered its construction. In other words, not built by Khufu. There is actually significant evidence that the pyramid was not built by Khufu, and only there is actually significant evidence that the pyramid was not actually built by Khufu, and the only reason historians and archaeologists date it to the fourth dynasty is due to a questionable discovery by English Egyptologist Major General Richard Weiss. Author and alternative theorist Zachariah Sitchin found there is ample evidence that Weiss, or English Egyptologist Major General Richard Weiss, VYSE, after spending over $1 million, Richard Weiss, this English Egyptologist, came up empty-handed and forged the cartouche of Cheops. So, according to Zachariah Sitchin, he goes on to say this English Egyptologist, Major General Richard Weiss, I will show you a picture of him. He forged the cartouche of Cheops. See, this is a little drawing of Richard Howard Weiss. Little drawing there, a sketch of this person. See it? And in the book of Enoch, inside the pyramid of Khufu, upon discovering Weiss' private journal, it noted that he could not find a cartouche or any hieroglyphics in the king's chamber, despite desperately searching for them. However, in his book written of the expedition 3 years later, it says he did find just one. So basically, he said he wrote in a book 3 years later. He claims that he found the cartouche in the king's chamber of Khufu, even though in his private writings he said he never found anything. So basically, what do you call it? This is it. Most specifically, it's the aforementioned red ochre cartouche. The inscription, which reads "The Gang of Khufu," was, they claim, found in 1837 by Sir Richard Weiss, a British soldier and adventurer who used gunpowder to blast his way into the inner chambers of the Great Pyramid. So it's because of this man we are led to believe that it was built by Khufu, this Richard Weiss. But he wrote in his journal, in his private journal, he found nothing when he used dynamite to blow his way into the Great Pyramids. There was no coffin, there was no sarcophagus of a pharaoh, nor a cartouche. But in a book that he wrote 3 years later, he said he found one. So you see what I mean. If you don't know what a cartouche is, a cartouche usually has the pharaoh's inscription in hieroglyphs. It's an oval. There's a cartouche there. Anything with a circle round it, it could be that way or that way, with pictorial writing. That's a hieroglyph. That's a cartouche. And he never found any cartouche or any coffin or sarcophagus of Khufu. Though he wrote it in his book that he published 3 years later, after, it wasn't anything in his private journal. Many believe it's possible that he drew the cartouche himself in order to label his expedition a success and appease his investors. Here, he spent millions of pounds in them days, in the 1800s, and that's, you can imagine how much that is today. Can you imagine? He spent millions of pounds, or over $1 million, and it was unsuccessful, so he had to do something. It says they believe they drew the cartouche himself to label his expedition a success to appease investors. Interestingly, the chamber had also been previously visited by explorers, with no one having seen a cartouche. Can you imagine that? Others before him said they never saw a cartouche of Pharaoh Khufu until Weiss allegedly discovered it. Sitchin also points out something else very interesting, Zechariah Sitchin, that the name of Khufu had been misspelt in a cartouche, which had been attributed to a misspelling in a book published at the time. Can you imagine it? He spelt Khufu. They allege that he painted the cartouche himself with the name Khufu, but he misspelt it, likely to have been in Weiss' possession and used his reference. Instead of spelling out Khufu, it actually read Rahufu. Further evidence came to light later. This is very interesting also, when 2 German scientists secretly scraped off the piece of cartouche paint, bringing it back to Dresden for testing. You know, where Weiss claimed that the cartouche was that he found, but they say that he actually, that they brought the, what do you call it, the piece of cartouche painting, brought it to Dresden for testing in Germany to German students. Though the sample was too small for dating, this was very interesting. It was found that the pigment was not painted on the original limestone and was instead found to be painted on plaster, seeming to prove that it was in fact counterfeited by Weiss. So it was just painted on plaster, not on, you know, the original limestone. I have a picture of the so-called cartouche that he found. I mean, look at that. A child could have done that. I could have done better than that. You can see that looks fake. I mean, that's a proper cartouche on the wall he done that? I mean, you know, obviously they found it was not painted on the original limestone. So they done testing and found out to be the case. So what does this have to do with the Book of Enoch, an ancient race? Eric von Duyken points out that the only reason we believe that Great Pyramid of Giza was built by Cheops or Khufu during the 4th dynasty is because of that cartouche, this vice. So he made it up just because he spent over $1 million in them days is a lot of money, and it was unsuccessful, and to publish a book. And he also points out the sarcophagus containing Khufu was never found at the site. Also, the methods of construction that mainstream archaeologists asserts were feasible for construction of the pyramids at the time are highly unlikely. Most historians who ascribe the dominant narrative of Khufu having been built the Great Pyramid refer to the writings of Greek historian Herodotus, who travelled to Egypt and recorded accounts of the pharaohs. But Herodotus is commonly chastised by Diodorus Seleucus, another Greek historian of the era, saying he often stretched the truth, was gullible and often flat out wrong. So Diodorus even discounts Herodotus' claim that the pyramid was built by Khufu Cheops. So this is interesting also. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Khufu, that von Duyken looks to the account, well, listen to this is very interesting, by an ancient Arabian historian named al-Makrizi. According to von Duyken, an account of ancient Arabian historian al-Makrizi, who writes that the Great Pyramid was known to have been built by a king who lived before the Great Flood, named Saurid, S-A-U-R-I-D. Or, in other words, was more commonly known in Hebrew, the word Saurid, as Enoch, the one in the Bible. Von Duyken says he believes that the preparation for the Great Flood, that he believes that it was built because he knew that the Great Flood was coming. Yeah, you see, Enoch, he communicated with God. He was, he walked with God, as it were. And he was aware in a lost book of Enoch that God was going to send a great flood on the earth to destroy all the wickedness on the earth, giants and the wicked people of the day. So God must have told Enoch to construct the Great Pyramid. Enoch constructs the pyramid, according to von Duyken, to protect biblical texts for future generations to discover. He says that the construction of the pyramids was also thanks to technology of the advanced beings whom Enoch was in contact with, whom he later left with, and to safeguard all the knowledge on earth and heaven until that time. So this is here. So basically, what it's saying is because he knew, he was well aware, Enoch, that God was going to send a flood to destroy the wicked earth at the time, those that on the earth before the floods. God allowed Enoch to build the Great Pyramid. I think someone pointed out, Isaiah 19:19, which states, "In that day there will prove to be an altar to Yahweh, God, in the midst of the land of Egypt, a pillar to God, Yahweh, besides its boundary. And it must prove to be for a sign and for a witness to Yahweh God of the armies of the land of Egypt. For they will cry out to Yahweh because of their oppressors, and he will send them a saviour, even a grand one who will actually deliver them. So he will prove to be an altar to God in the midst of the land of Egypt. So some have said, attributed the Great Pyramid to that's what it's saying in Isaiah. An altar to God. So he wanted to preserve all the advanced knowledge that had been before the flood. People don't realise it's not just now we have advanced technology. Just like before the flood and God destroyed the world, technology back then was very advanced. The fallen angels had come down before the flood and gave them forbidden knowledge to their children, the giants. So Enoch knew a lot of advanced technology, and also geometry, advanced mathematics is inside the Great Pyramid. And Enoch wanted to preserve knowledge of the heavens, the universe, and knowledge of the earth. So that's what I believe to be the case. It wasn't Khufu. It was already when Khufu, there was a Pharaoh Khufu, but when he was around, he was what do you call it, in the past, as Khufu, he merely rebuilt it, something that was already there. If there was any damage to it, all he did was improve it, but it was already there before the flood, and it was constructed there to keep the knowledge for future generations. And boy, that's the only thing of the seven wonders of the ancient world to have survived, because God knew if it was paper, it would be destroyed. Any knowledge written on paper would be a waste of time. So mathematics is in advanced knowledge of pi, and heaven and earth is in the pyramid. And I will show you a 6-minute video to prove this. This video will show 6 minutes by abstract way the geometry of the Great Pyramid, the mathematics of the Pyramid of Egypt.
The mathematics of pyramids of Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Cairo, Egypt. The superlatives that describe the Great Pyramid of Giza speaks for itself. It's the largest and oldest of the 3 pyramids and was the tallest man-made structure globally for 3,800 years. But there's also plenty of math behind one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. What makes it even more unique is that the Great Pyramid of Giza is the only known pyramid in Egypt with both descending and ascending inner passages. Did you know that in cubits, that is the first recorded unit of length, the pyramid's perimeter is 365.24. That is the number of days in the year. That the pyramid's perimeter divided by twice its height is equal to pi, 3.1416, or that the king's chamber measurements are based on a Pythagorean triangle, 345. The position of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid is most accurately aligned structure in existence and faces true north with only 3/60th of a degree of error. The position of the North Pole moves over time, and the pyramid was exactly aligned at one time. But not only that, the Great Pyramid of Giza happens to be the center of landmass. The Great Pyramid is located at the center of the landmass of the Earth. The east or west parallel that crosses the most land and the north or south meridian that crosses the most land intersect in two places on the Earth, one in the ocean and the other at the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid of Giza built in harmony with mathematics. Mathematically speaking, the Great Pyramid of Giza is perfect. The Great Pyramid's elevation encodes three of the most important constants in mathematics: pi, phi, and e. According to detailed survey data from Flinders Petrie and J.H. Cole, the slope angle of 51.85 degree comes from measurements taken off the remaining casing stones. These encodings can be verified with the following equations. The accuracy percentage for each equation is given in parentheses. 4 into 51.85 degree upon 76.30 degree is equal to E, which is 99.998%. Tan 51.85 degree is equal to 4 upon pi, which is 99.99%. Cos 51.85 is equal to 1.
More on the same subject by someone else, Believer's Testimony on the advanced mathematics of the pyramid, Great Pyramid.
Within 99.99% accuracy. In fact, they said it's one of the most accurately true north buildings on Earth. And that's kind of amazing for their day, isn't it? We look at some of the celestial signs. The relationship of the pyramid to Orion's belt. We all know Orion's constellation, and in the middle there are three stars in a row. And if we look at those three stars and lay that constellation and line it up north to north, that looks kind of interesting, doesn't it? In fact, if we take it to the next step, we look at those stars superimposed on the pyramids. What do we see? Not only is the alignment and the distance proportional, but also the brightness is proportional to the size of the structures. So we have alignment, relative spacing, and relative size that match. And you can see it. Isn't that quite amazing? When we look at the south air shaft from the King's Chamber in 2140 BC, it points to Orion, and it points to the star that would be associated with the Great Pyramid. Is that a coincidence? Well, we find that this is one of the constellations mentioned in Job 38 when God said, "Who's going to know this?" God. And it points to the exact location in Orion's belt. Now for some of the mathematical proofs. We look at the base of the Great Pyramid is 365.242 pyramid cubits. Remember, that was 25 cubic pyramid inches. And it's interesting because the Egyptian calendar had 365 days. It did not have partial days. And they didn't understand irrational numbers like 365, 242. If we look at the calendar year, it has 365, 242, 185 days per year. Takes in that leap year and all that stuff. The Egyptians didn't have this knowledge, and yet it's represented in the size of the base of the pyramid. Are you interested? And that is 99.99995% accurate. Could you build a building today that represented it that accurately in a size? You would have a tough time. We see the pyramid specifies the value of pi. And once again, they didn't have irrational numbers, so they didn't understand this. And so if you take the base twice, divided by the height, you come up with 3.141596422. And pi is, you'll see we've got 5 digits of precision to pi. And so it's 99.9998% accurate, represented. Engineers call this an overdetermined structure. So there's things represented here that aren't really necessary for the design or structure of the building, but they're shown here. We're only going to show you a few. We look at the golden ratio. And the golden ratio is it's used in architecture, it's used in design, and it's intrinsically gives us our concept of beauty and symmetry as well. And so we take the apothem divided by the base, and it comes up with 1.618. That's the golden ratio. And so when we have the golden ratio, you see we have 1, then we go 1.618, and then it continues. It predicts that with 99.94% accuracy. The golden spiral. So if we look at this nautilus shell, and many seashells follow this, this is called fractal geometry. It's demonstrated in the shell. And it's also demonstrated here again. We have the layout of the pyramids, and guess what? It's shown there precisely as well. And it's also shown if you go through the capstone to the base plane, the basal plane, and then you come up to the great step, and then you go to the far side of the king's chamber, and then it will come out at the entrance to the king's chamber. That's the fraction. That's the loop, precisely and mathematically. So we see a great internal symmetry in the Great Pyramid as well. We look at the golden ratio again, and people that have facial features that use the golden ratio are considered beautiful. It's universal. So when we see a picture of a beautiful person, it's likely that most of their features follow this golden ratio. If we look at the human hand, it demonstrates in our DNA.
So isn't it very interesting, brothers and sisters? You know, too much of a coincidence, you know, mathematical precision, you know, in the Great Pyramid, you know, pi, the solar year, you know, the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequence, as you say, you know, true north, and the list goes on. It was built. So what have you been taught by so-called historians? That ancient history is all fabricated. If you want to know ancient history, it's all in the Bible. Well, I believe that, you know, Enoch built it for the very reason to preserve all this advanced mathematics and knowledge of heaven and earth, because otherwise, you know, it would have to preserve it, and only now recently it's been discovered. So it was to preserve ancient knowledge back then that only now we've just found out. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't come to know Christ, please do, because he is the only way, truth and the life. Repent through his name to gain salvation. Thank you very much.